Hello and welcome to Dialogue. Ukrainian President Zelensky has arrived in the U.S. and will be joined by European leaders for meetings with U.S. President Donald Trump in a bid to work out a peace deal for the Ukraine conflict. This meeting followed Trump's talks with Russian President Vladimir Putin in Alaska on Friday, and a change by Trump to focus on a peace deal rather than first pursuing a ceasefire. In his latest social media post, Trump also says Zelensky must agree to some of Russia's conditions for the war in Ukraine to end. So what was the result of Friday's talks, and what does Trump's change mean? And what can we expect from talks Monday at the White House with President Zelensky and the largest ever European leader delegation? And how will the conflict finally be resolved? Join us for our discussion today, live from Beijing. I'm Xu Qinduo. Well, joining me now are Andrey Kortunov, Academic Director of Russian International Affairs Council, Josef Gregory Mahoney, Professor of Politics from East China Normal University, Zhou Bo, Senior Fellow of Center for International Security and Strategy at Tsinghua University, and later on Ruslan Bortnik, Director of the Ukrainian Institute of Politics. Welcome to Dialogue. Andrey, I will start with you. So the meeting in resetting U.S., let's say, U.S. relationship with Russia and Russia's Ukraine conflict with the East, there's been a flood of interpretation and criticism, mostly from the West, about Trump's summit with Putin. But it's also the first meeting between U.S. and Russian leaders since the war began, which is important. How do you see the summit's role in ending the conflict? There's no deal, but probably there's it's a substantial meeting between the two leaders. Andrey?
Well, I think that the summit was clearly a success story for both sides. I think on the eve of the summit, they carefully managed expectations, saying that it will be just a fact-finding mission, a kind of first attempt to narrow the gap in the positions. But it turns out that they were able to agree on more issues than they had anticipated from the very beginning. And I think that Russia achieved at least two important goals. First of all, it's clear that a new package of U.S. sanctions, including secondary sanctions against Russia's trading partners, is likely to be postponed, if not cancelled altogether. And second, it is also clear that Putin basically bought into the idea that peace is more important than a ceasefire, and that one should start working on the peace agreement, not only on an armistice or any kind of de-escalation that was discussed within the expert community over the last couple of months quite intensively.
Professor Mahoney, of course, exactly for that, or mostly for that, for what Andrey has said, Trump was under pressure, was criticized for, say, not mentioning more sanctions or secondary sanctions for Russian partners, and also for agreeing with President Putin to pursue a peace deal rather than a ceasefire. What do you make of that?
Well, on the one hand, I think if we look at it in the broader context of Trump's foreign policy and the shortcomings he's faced thus far in sort of resolving his trade war and resolving conflicts in Gaza, Ukraine, and elsewhere that he promised from day one, that he's under the gun. And in the broader analysis, I believe that he has to resolve the conflict with Ukraine and deal with all these issues before he can really begin to narrow on his trade war and his conflict with China, with the idea that he needs to try to turn some corner in that relationship before Thanksgiving, before Black Friday, in order to ensure that Americans, have the adequate consumer confidence to go out and spend for Christmas, and so he can have his praises sung in American churches across the land. So I think he's under a tight schedule. I think it took longer for him to resolve all of these issues than he imagined, and so I think he's being very amenable to the Russian side. That said, I think the Russian side is being pragmatic relative to the gains they've made on the ground. It remains to be seen whether or not Zelensky will be in a position to actually accept those.
Zhou Bo, from Chinese perspective, and how do you look at the summit between the two leaders?
I think it's useful. I would say certainly President Putin has gained more, but President Trump probably is being sandwiched by President Putin and President Zelensky, because if he walks away, American cloud will be in doubt. But now he seems to be walking deep into the quagmire, because all the conditions actually are mixed together. It's very easy for people to talk about it, but which really comes first? This is just a question of whether you put the cart in front of the horse or the horse behind the car. You see, ceasefire, of course, is desirable, but if you talk about overall peace, which seems to be more ideal, but it would be harder. And so there are suspicions from both sides. I just believe that this is a necessary step and the necessary first step leading to other steps. But you see, even what might happen next? Yeah, because President Putin has invited President Trump to go to Moscow, and I believe even if there are some problems, President Trump probably would have to go to Moscow, because the first step has already started, right? Without going to Moscow, what can he achieve, even if he's a mediator? Yeah. So, but so long as he goes to Moscow, that will be the second win for President Putin.
Andrey, during this short press conference after the meeting, President Putin said it was necessary to consider all legitimate concerns of Russia and to reinstate a just balance of security in Europe. A day later, Mr. Putin also said he and Trump had the opportunity to discuss the origins and causes of this crisis, adding, it is a removal of these root causes that must underlie the settlement, indicating Russia would like to move forward with settling all issues by peaceful means only when those root causes are addressed. So tell us, what are the root causes?
Well, arguably, the most important concern that they have here in Moscow is the geographical expansion of the NATO alliance. And I think this is exactly what they would like to stop, because they believe that NATO is not a friendly alliance, that it presents a challenge, if not a direct threat, to the Russian Federation. And its expansion to the east is, of course, a matter of very serious concern here. Second, we got to do something about conventional and also arguably nuclear arms control in Europe, because these mechanisms have been eroded and they are almost non-existent by now. For instance, the United States under the Trump administration abandoned the INF treaty, and later on Russia abandoned the CFE treaty. So we don't have a NATO-Russia Council anymore. There is no mill-to-mill interaction between the two sides, and the risks are high. So we need to have at least some kind of communication lines to restore confidence and predictability, to bring down the costs and the risks associated with an uncontrolled arms race in Europe. Europe is likely to be divided, but even in a divided Europe, we can assure some level of stability and predictability, which would already be a major accomplishment.
Professor Mahoney, how are they going to address those concerns, the Russian concerns? From Europeans' point of view, they say Russia is a powerful country, it's a big country. There's no security concern. All the smaller countries, they are not going to invade Russia. What's your response to that?
Well, I think, it's been clear that the expansion of NATO has been a trigger. And, Trump even acknowledged this several months ago, that the war in Ukraine was likely caused substantially by NATO expansion. And of course, we know that Trump himself has been someone who's cast a lot of doubt on the value of NATO and whether or not the U.S. should remain committed to it as it once was in the past. And not just as a means for inducing the Europeans themselves to spend more on their security. It is a case that we did see the U.S. Trying to foster regime change or a color revolution in Ukraine. We did see those efforts creating more conflict between Ukraine and Russia, and certainly it gave play to the longer-standing cultural and linguistic divisions that have always been characteristic of Ukraine, but haven't always been in such a state of conflict. So I think it's clear that Russia is concerned about that. I think Russia is also concerned about the military buildup that they see in Poland, the close relationship that they see between some of the former Soviet or Warsaw Bloc nations that are pushing for more aggression or defensive positions or even offensive capabilities directed at Russia. So Russia clearly has a genuine sense of security concern here.
Well, Zhou Bo, of course, another seems like a controversial point is, especially from, within the U.S. and Europeans, is like Trump's change of mind from pursuing a ceasefire to, say, a peace deal, go directly to the peace deal. Of course, that requires, more probably, demands more, say, if not a compromise or concessions from both sides or one side anyway. So how do you look at the change? People say he's aligning with Putin, he's aligning with Russia. Is that the case?
Well, I think everybody knows President Putin is so unpredictable, and he sometimes likes to be unpredictable. And of course, he's also changeable. But on this issue, putting all this aside, I believe he actually doesn't know what to do next. But he has to go down the road, because if we think about the so-called land swap, this sounds like a land for peace, in the Middle East. But the point is, whose land is it? Yeah, the Ukrainian land, right? So it's basically asking Ukraine to exchange Ukrainian land for Ukrainian land. Yeah. So, but the problem is right now the ball is in the court of Ukraine, because actually most people in Ukraine would disagree to such kind of exchange, or ceding any Ukrainian land to Russia. But the point is, Ukrainian people are simply outnumbered, So long as the war goes on, Ukraine will just bleed more than Russia. In other words, this war is more affordable for Russia than to Ukraine. So that is a dilemma for President Zelensky. He could just choose to fight on, but the point is, would he really fight on till the so-called last Ukrainian, or would he stop? To take the poisonous pill. That is something we have to wait and see.
Welcome to the show, Ruslan from Ukraine. Here, of course, President Trump, wrote a piece on the social media saying that Zelensky can end the war almost immediately if he wants to, or he can continue to fight. What do you make of that?
I think the President of the United States is trying to move the responsibility on the Ukrainian and European side in such a statement. And he shows that United States and Russia maybe find some partially but principal agreement or consensus on the resolution of the Ukrainian crisis. And to move this responsibility to Ukraine and Europe, to take it off White House shoulders. But also it's an approach to make a pressure for Zelensky before the meeting, to put him in the angle of the view of the responsibility of what will happen in the future with Ukraine, with the conflict, and to make a pressure on Zelensky towards accepting some consensus, some compromises with Russia and with the United States. We are talking about the land issue. We are talking about the geopolitical strategy issues. We are talking about the management and governmental issues. So I think it's a tactic very common for nowadays White House administration.
Well, Ruslan, in a piece carried by New York Times, they say Trump endorsed a peace plan of Ukraine, ceding the whole of the Donetsk and Luhansk to Russia, with Moscow agreeing to cease hostilities along the current front line of Zaporozhye and Kherson regions. I mean, how realistic is that? What are the chances of Zelensky agreeing to that kind of land swap?
I cannot fully decline the probability of this scenario, but it's very hard to do such concessions for Ukrainian president because Ukrainian constitution and Ukrainian public opinion are strictly against any land concessions towards Russia. So it's possible only very special environment if the United States, Europe, Russia and other geopolitical players like China will strictly support such scenario and will prepare some compensation instruments on Ukraine. We are talking about money, we are talking about supporting of political re-election and surviving of Zelensky and his team in Ukrainian lands. It looks rational, of course. Of course, it looks rational in these circumstances, but it's extremely hard to accept and even more harder to fulfill for Ukrainian government and Ukrainian president. I know that Ukrainian president is going to convince the Trump's administration and personally Trump to change Trump's attitude to this conflict and to go back to the topic of a ceasefire and to avoid some swaps of territorial swaps, which could be very damageable for the reputation of Ukrainian leader.
Professor Mahoney, of course, the European leader delegation will also be in Washington. I think their goal is similar to President Zelensky, to persuade Trump, not to accept this, to not pursue peace deal, not to accept the land swap deal. But to what degree they will be successful?
Well, I think the European leadership has to go. They have mobilized a lot of their own public opinion over the last couple of years to support the Ukrainian cause. They are very personally invested politically in this struggle, and it's one of the defining issues of the European Union today. I don't think that we've seen Trump previously giving considerable respect to either Zelensky or European leaders. And certainly, I think Europe is still smarting from the 15% that they were able to negotiate down to, they felt like they should have gotten closer to 10 or even below that. And they're still very much concerned about the meddling that they're seeing from the Trump administration in some of the right-wing politics in Europe, and certainly undermining some of the long-standing commitments to shared values, or even NATO itself that the White House sort of consistently signals. So I think that they're going as sort of a united front. I'm not sure that they can sustain that. I think Trump can provide more guarantees for NATO. I think he can provide more security guarantees for Ukraine. He might even shave some points off the recent tariff deal to get the Europeans to go along. I think he has leverage, and the Europeans themselves have already demonstrated that they're not really in a position to dictate terms to the White House.
Andrey, of course, it seems, like a trade-off exchange for the land swap or peace deal. Trump would be ready to offer some security guarantee, probably together with the Europeans, for Ukraine. Is that acceptable for Moscow?
Well, I think that the Russian leadership clearly wants to get more. And I think that they are concerned about the political dynamics within Ukraine, because if one imagines that Ukraine remains explicitly anti-Russian, with a lot of irredentist feelings inside its population. If Ukraine remains heavily militarized, maybe through a bilateral agreement with the United States or with select European nations, if Ukraine seeks revenge, definitely that would constitute an existential challenge to Russia's security. So if you look at the list of the Putin's terms on the peace settlement, it still includes quote-unquote demilitarization of Ukraine and quote-unquote denazification of Ukraine. It's a matter of interpretation. You can take a broader or a narrower definition of these terms, but definitely this is about the political future of the country, not just about territories.
Well, the U.S. envoy Witkoff talking about a kind of offer of a security guarantee, which is similar to NATO's Article 5 agreement. That means like if there's one member under attack, every member. That means every member is under attack. So I can imagine like they say what they would mean is like if Ukraine is under attack, then basically every European country is under attack. They will join the Europeans, let's say, possibly against Russia in this case. I mean, I find it hard to accept for Moscow. Is that the case? Andrey? Yeah.
Well, I think that in Moscow, the perception is that Europeans are not in a position to provide security for Ukraine without the United States. So it will be up to Donald Trump to decide how much he is ready to provide in terms of the Ukraine security, whether he is ready to turn Ukraine into another Israel or another Japan, or it will be more symbolic and more ambiguous in terms of security guarantees.
Well, Zhou Bo, of course, as we earlier mentioned about the possible role of China and other global South countries, what kind of a role China can play in the process, leading to a peace deal or post conflict period of time?
Well, I think China's role is not now, but it could be in two scenarios in the future. First of all, if there is a ceasefire or even armistice that requires guarantee from all major powers, China could be one of them, right? But this, of course, there is a sad precedence. In 1990, actually, all the major powers have failed, even if they have promised security guarantee to Ukraine when Ukraine decided to give up nuclear weapons. But still, this kind of collective guarantee modified from major power might be most useful. The second thing is if it's a big if. If both Russia and Ukraine agree to a kind of a peacekeeping, then I believe China would be in the best position to take the lead, to send peacekeepers along with some other peacekeepers from global South countries, plus a few selected non-NATO EU countries to participate in peacekeeping. Why do I say non-NATO EU countries? Because anyway, this is the war in the heartland of Europe. But how can Russia accept any NATO presence? So it has to be some other EU countries other than NATO members.
Well, Ruslan, President Trump also said that basically, Zelensky or Ukraine has to accept that there's no NATO membership and there's no return of Crimea. So he's laying out basically some of these, very possible likely realities, facing Ukraine, however, they like it or not. Is that acceptable? Is that a reality? People largely accept, what it is right now?
That's also a very good question. We need to understand that Ukrainians are seeking not just a NATO. Ukrainians are seeking for security. And if there will be another strong format for security, security guarantees, it could be quite acceptable for Ukrainian elites and majority of Ukrainian society. Sociological polls in Ukraine clearly show that the level of confidence about the future acceptance of Ukraine in NATO and even in European Union is decreasing, and less and less Ukrainians still believe that Ukraine could be part of this organization. So the question of security, the question of guarantees of existence of the state, and the question of prosper being. Prosper being also is very important for Ukraine in topics of restoration, in topics of covering the huge state budget deficit after the war, and in each this level, I think we may found different decisions, different resolutions, not only in NATO and not only in the European Union. But it's very hard for the West also to rebuild the approach to Ukraine, because it's much easier to promise the member in the European Union or NATO and doing nothing. It's like a carrot behind, or in the front of animal. But it's much harder to find another scenario and another model of cooperation which could be balanced with Russia and could be acceptable for Ukraine.
Mm-hmm. Professor Mahoney, European and NATO leaders will also attend this White House talks with Zelensky Monday. They had issued a statement saying that achieving a just and a lasting peace that preserves Ukraine's vital interests and the security of Europe is a key goal. Do you think they will achieve that kind of a goal? Do you think President Trump will change his mind, given what he said, that it's up to Zelensky, it's up to the Europeans basically to make concessions and to end the conflict right now?
Well, I think what we're hearing is that Trump has actually staggered the meetings, that he will meet with Zelensky first. So he'll get the first crack at him and then meet the larger group. And again, Trump can offer some increased support for NATO and contribute to Ukrainian guarantees, and maybe even suggest some way of supporting politically or verbally at least, the idea of a European reassurance force. But that said, I think that what we should expect is I don't think we're going to have a big blow up. I don't think Trump wants to go hard. I think he wants to. I don't think we're going to see him being a sweetheart, but I do think he wants something now from these people, and he's going to try to charm, but at the same time pressure. So I think that's what we'll see over the next couple of days as he tries to work out a deal with the European and Ukrainian side.
I mean, what cards do the Europeans have if they want to persuade or pressure Trump?
Well, I mean, there's sort of a danger for both sides. I agree with the earlier point that Trump could just wash his hands and walk away. That would certainly create some problems for the U.S., but it would also create problems for Europe. So they're going to have to come together and reach some sort of consensus. I agree with the idea that Ukraine cannot do this alone. They can't do this just with European support. So ultimately, I think what we've seen is that the U.S. still has the largest leverage here, but can also give up a bit to move them along.
Right. On that note, we are coming to the end of today's show. Many thanks to our guests. You can also find us on the CGTN app or on YouTube. I'm Xu Qinduo. Thanks for being with us. See you next time.